Pennsylvania, November 1944. The transport truck rattled through the gates of Camp Reynolds, its brakes hissing against the cold afternoon air. Through the canvas flaps, a group of German women could see their new prison. Rows of white barracks, guard towers silhouetted against a grey sky, and beyond the fences, rolling hills painted in autumn gold and red. The landscape was untouched. No craters, no rubble, no smoke. Just trees, grass, and an impossible quietness that felt more unsettling than any bombardment. 32-year-old Margaret Hoffman sat rigid on the wooden bench, her hands clasped in her lap. She'd been a radio operator with the Luftwaffe, captured near Aachen when her unit was overrun. The journey across the Atlantic had taken 3 weeks, each day filled with whispered fears about what awaited them in America. The stories had been specific, horrifying. American camps where prisoners were starved, beaten, used for medical experiments. The Reich's propaganda ministry had made certain every German knew what capture meant. The truck lurched to a stop. The canvas flap pulled back, revealing not snarling guards with raised rifles, but a middle-aged American sergeant with wire-rimmed glasses holding a clipboard. "Ladies," he said through an interpreter, his voice tired but not unkind. "Welcome to Camp Reynolds. You'll be processed, assigned quarters, and given your first meal. Please exit in single file." Margarete climbed down, her legs stiff from the journey. Around her, the other women moved slowly, warily, scanning for the trap they knew must be coming. But the guards just pointed toward a building, and they walked, unshackled, across gravel that crunched beneath their worn boots. Inside the processing center, the fluorescent lights were too bright after weeks of dim cargo holds. An American woman in a Red Cross uniform smiled at them, actually smiled, and began explaining the camp rules. 3 meals a day, work assignments based on skills, letters home once a week, medical care available. It sounded too good to be real. Then came the moment that would haunt Margaret for the rest of her life. After their medical examinations and uniform exchanges, clean cotton dresses to replace their filthy military clothes, they were led to the mess hall. Long tables stretched beneath industrial lights. The smell hit them before they saw the source. Meat. Real meat, roasting somewhere in the back kitchens. And something else. Something sweet and foreign. The American mess sergeant, a heavy-set man with a Brooklyn accent thick as molasses, moved down the serving line with mechanical efficiency. Each woman received a metal tray divided into sections. Mashed potatoes, green beans, a thick slice of meatloaf, bread with butter, and in the smallest compartment, something wrapped in brown paper with silver lettering. When Margaret reached the front, the sergeant plopped a portion onto her tray, and then, with a grin, added an extra chocolate bar beside the first. "Special today," he said, though she didn't understand. "Hershey's. Best chocolate in the world." She stared at the wrapped bars. Each one was marked with unfamiliar words. Hershey's milk chocolate. The paper was clean, printed, industrial. Behind her, another woman gasped softly. "They give this to soldiers?" someone whispered in German. Margaret carried her tray to a table and sat down with 4 other women from her unit. They stared at their food in collective silence. The portions were enormous. The butter glistened. Steam rose from the potatoes. "Don't eat it," hissed Greta Schaefer, a former nurse from Hamburg. "It's a test. They want to see if we'll take their food like animals." "Or it's poisoned," added another. "They feed us well once, then." "Then why waste the food?" Margaret interrupted quietly. But even as she spoke, she didn't touch her fork. For 10 minutes, 32 German women sat before full trays of hot food and didn't eat. American soldiers at nearby tables noticed and exchanged confused glances. The mess sergeant approached, frowning. "Something wrong with the chow?" he asked the interpreter. The interpreter, a young German-American woman from Philadelphia, translated. Margarete spoke carefully. We were told that American camps starve prisoners, that you make us work until we die. This food," she gestured at the tray, "this is too much." "Why?" The mess sergeant's face softened. He pulled up a chair, sitting backwards on it, arms crossed over the back. "Lady, I don't know what they told you over there, but this is America. The Geneva Convention says we feed you right, so we feed you right. This ain't special treatment. This is Tuesday." Through the interpreter, his words landed like stones in water, rippling outward. Tuesday. This abundance, enough food for a week back home, was ordinary here. "And the chocolate?" Margaret asked, pointing at the wrapped bars she hadn't dared touch. "Standard issue," the sergeant said. "Every American soldier gets them in their rations. Your POWs under U.S. Army care, so you get the same? Well, close enough." He stood up, knees popping. "Eat or don't, your choice. But we got apple pie coming out in 20 minutes, and you're going to hate yourselves if you miss it." He walked away, leaving the women staring at their trays. Slowly, carefully, one woman picked up her fork. She took a small bite of potato, chewed, swallowed, waited. Nothing happened. She took another bite. Soon others followed, breaking the dam of fear. The food was real. It was safe, and it was delicious in a way that made several women cry into their napkins. But the chocolate bars remained untouched. Margaret picked one up, feeling its weight. It was light, almost nothing. The paper crinkled. She'd heard of chocolate before, of course. Luxury item, reserved for officers or special occasions in the Reich. But she'd never actually tasted it. Now here were 2 full bars sitting on her tray like they were nothing. "I don't trust it," Greta muttered. "It's too sweet, too American. It's probably drugged. Or marked," another woman suggested darkly. "They'll know who eats it, who gives in first." Margaret turned the bar over in her hands, studying the silver lettering. Somewhere deep in her exhausted, terrified mind, a thought emerged. If they wanted to poison us, they would have done it to the potatoes. The chocolate is just chocolate. But she still didn't open it. That night, in the barracks, clean bunks with real mattresses and wool blankets, Margaret lay awake, staring at the ceiling. In her locker sat the 2 chocolate bars, still wrapped. Around her, women whispered in the darkness. Did you see their kitchen? Industrial ovens, refrigerators the size of rooms. The guards don't carry whips, just keys. This isn't a camp, it's... I don't know what this is. Margarete closed her eyes. For months, she had been certain that capture meant death. The propaganda had been relentless. America was depicted as a land of gangsters and criminals, a collapsing empire held together by Jewish bankers and corrupt politicians. German soldiers who surrendered, they'd been told, would be tortured for information and then disposed of. Yet here she lay, on a clean mattress, in a heated building, her stomach full for the first time in months. And somewhere in her locker, 2 chocolate bars sat waiting, small, wrapped symbols of everything she'd been taught to fear and everything that terrified her now, the possibility that she'd been lied to about all of it. The narrator's voice cut through the darkness of her thoughts. She had crossed an ocean expecting monsters. Instead, she found an empire so confident in its power that it fed its enemies chocolate. But before Margaret Hoffman could understand what that meant, she would first have to break the final barrier of propaganda and take a single bite. By the end of the first week, the German women at Camp Reynolds had begun to accept that they wouldn't be killed. The evidence was overwhelming. 3 hot meals daily, medical care without question, even recreational activities organized by the Red Cross. They worked 4 hours each morning in the camp laundry or sewing factory, mending uniforms and parachutes. The work was tedious, but not brutal. The guards were watchful, but not cruel. But the chocolate bars? Those remained untouched in most lockers. Camp Reynolds had been built to house 500 prisoners, mostly German officers and NCOs captured in France and Italy. By late 1944, it held nearly 800, including the growing population of women, Luftwaffe auxiliaries, communications clerks, nurses captured as the Third Reich's territories contracted. The camp sat on 60 acres of Pennsylvania farmland, requisitioned from a dairy farmer who now supplied the facility with fresh milk. The American system operated with a precision that stunned Margaret. Every morning, supply trucks arrived from the depot in Harrisburg, crates of canned goods, sacks of flour, boxes of meat packed in ice. The Americans logged everything in triplicate: requisition forms, inventory sheets, distribution records. Nothing was left to chance. Even the garbage was weighed and recorded. In Germany, by late 1944, such organization had collapsed under the weight of Allied bombing. Supply lines were shattered, cities starved. Here in Pennsylvania, the machine ran so smoothly it seemed almost inhuman. The mess hall became the center of their education in American abundance. Every meal delivered fresh shocks: scrambled eggs from powder that somehow tasted real, beef stew thick with vegetables, bread so soft it seemed like cake. And always, always, the chocolate bars appeared on trays, handed out as casually as napkins. "You gonna eat those?" an American guard asked Margaret one afternoon, pointing at her untouched chocolate. She shook her head. "Why not? They're good. My kid brother would kill for Hershey bars." Through the interpreter, Margaret tried to explain. "We don't trust it." The guard laughed, not mockingly, but with genuine amusement. "Lady, you've been eating our food for a week. If we wanted to poison you, wouldn't we have done it by now?" The logic was undeniable. And yet. The breakthrough came on a Sunday, during mail call. The camp commander had authorized the women to write letters home. Censored, of course, but real letters nonetheless. Margaret received one back from her sister in Stuttgart, 3 months delayed, the paper thin and dirty from its journey. "Dearest Greta," it began, "we have not had meat in 2 months. The ration cards give us 200 grams of bread per day, sometimes less. Mother's shoes have holes, but there are no new ones. We burn furniture to stay warm. Are you alive? Are they treating you well? We pray every night. Helga." Margaret read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in her pocket. That evening at dinner, she picked up the chocolate bar from her tray. The other women at her table fell silent, watching. She unwrapped it slowly. The paper came away to reveal a brown bar divided into neat rectangles, each one stamped with the Hershey's logo. The smell reached her first, sweet, rich, unlike anything in her recent memory. "Greta," she said quietly, using her sister's name though, speaking to her table-mate, Greta Schaefer. "My family is starving, and we're being given chocolate." She broke off a single square and placed it in her mouth. The taste exploded across her tongue, sweet, creamy, so rich it almost hurt. Sugar she hadn't tasted in years, fat and cocoa and milk, all compressed into 2 centimeters of luxury. She closed her eyes, and for just a moment forgot where she was. When she opened them again, tears were streaming down her face. "My God," she whispered, "they give this to their soldiers?" Around her, the other women stared. Then, one by one, they unwrapped their own bars. The mess hall filled with the soft rustle of paper and small gasps of disbelief. Greta Schaefer bit into hers and immediately began laughing and crying at once. Another woman, a stern Prussian officer's daughter who hadn't smiled in months, broke her bar into tiny pieces and savored each one like communion. An American sergeant passing by paused, watching the scene with a puzzled expression. "They act like they've never had chocolate before," he muttered. "Most of them haven't," the interpreter replied softly. "Not like this. Not ever." The truth settled over the room like snow. These women had fought for an empire that promised them greatness while feeding them turnips and sawdust bread. And here, in captivity, as prisoners of the nation they'd been taught to hate, They were eating chocolate that American soldiers carried into battle as casually as ammunition. That night, Margaret wrote in her diary, a small notebook the Red Cross had provided. "Today I tasted American chocolate. It was sweeter than anything I remember from childhood. But the sweetness is bitter, because I understand now what it means. This chocolate is mass-produced. It is given to every soldier, every prisoner, as if it costs nothing. In Germany, such luxury would be reserved for the Führer himself. Here, it is Tuesday. How do you fight a nation that feeds its enemies chocolate? How did we ever believe we could win?" The numbers told their own devastating story. Margaret learned them in fragments, pieced together from overheard conversations, newspapers left in the recreation hall, and careful questions to the guards. The United States produced 1.2 billion pounds of chocolate during the war years. Hershey alone manufactured 500,000 ration bars daily. Every American soldier received a D ration bar in their field pack, a dense 600-calorie chocolate bar designed to sustain them in combat. By contrast, Germany's chocolate production had been reserved entirely for the military elite and propaganda purposes. Civilian chocolate had vanished by 1941. Even Wehrmacht soldiers rarely saw it. But it wasn't just chocolate. Camp Reynolds received 3,000 pounds of meat per week for its prisoners. Fresh vegetables arrived daily from local farms. The camp bakery produced 500 loaves of bread each morning. Every prisoner consumed an average of 2,800 calories per day, more than German soldiers at the front received by 1944. Margaret watched the American supply system with the eyes of a former logistics officer. She'd coordinated radio communications for supply convoys in France. She understood what it took to feed an army. What she witnessed at Camp Reynolds was beyond impressive. It was terrifying. Trucks arrived on schedule. Warehouses rotated stock with scientific precision. Spoilage rates were under 2%. The Americans had turned warfare logistics into an industrial science. They didn't just outfight Germany. They outproduced it by orders of magnitude so vast that they could afford to feed their prisoners better than Germany fed its own people. One afternoon, during a break from laundry duty, Margaret stood by the camp fence, watching American soldiers unload supply trucks. Crate after crate, canned peaches, powdered milk, coffee, sugar, and always boxes marked Hershey's. Greta Schaefer joined her at the fence. "We were fools," she said quietly. "We were lied to," Margareta corrected. "Is there a difference?" An American guard nearby, a young man from Iowa named Private Jensen, noticed them watching. He walked over, friendly as always. "You ladies figuring out how we won the war?" he asked through the interpreter. Margaret met his eyes. "You didn't just win with bombs. You won with this." She gestured at the supply trucks. "You made victory inevitable before the first shot was fired." Jensen considered this, then nodded slowly. "My dad's a farmer. He always says, 'You can't harvest what you didn't plant.' Guess that's true for countries too." That night, the women gathered in their barracks after lights out, a nightly ritual that had become their own form of processing the impossible. They spoke in hushed German, sharing observations like intelligence reports. "The guards eat the same food as us," one woman noted. "I watched them in the mess hall. Same trays, same portions." "No," another corrected. "They eat slightly less meat. We get more because of the Geneva Convention requirements." A stunned silence followed. "You're telling me," someone whispered, "that we, prisoners, eat better than American soldiers?" "Better than our families, certainly," Margaret said. She'd received another letter from Stuttgart. Her sister had written, "Helga traded her wedding ring for a sack of potatoes. £6. It lasted 8 days. 6 pounds of potatoes for a gold ring." Meanwhile, Margaret received fresh potatoes at every meal and chocolate bars she'd initially been too frightened to eat. The contrast wasn't just humiliating, it was transformative. By December, the chocolate bars had become currency, comfort and communion all at once. The women saved them, traded them, shared them during their evening gatherings. Some wrote to guards requesting extra bars to send home, not realizing that would be impossible. Others carefully hoarded wrappers, smoothing them flat and preserving them like religious artifacts. Margaret kept her first chocolate wrapper pressed between the pages of her diary. On it, she'd written in tiny script, "Given freely by those we were taught to hate. Proof that power need not mean cruelty." The American guards noticed the transformation. The German women smiled more, worked more efficiently, even began learning English phrases. The chocolate had done what months of propaganda couldn't undo. It had proven through taste and abundance that they'd been fighting on the wrong side. One evening, the mess sergeant, the same Brooklyn native who'd served them that first suspicious meal, approached Margaret as she cleared her tray. "You like the chocolate now?" he asked, grinning. She smiled back. "Yes, very much. Good, 'cause we got 5,000 more bars coming in tomorrow. Gotta use 'em before they expire. 5,000 chocolate bars. Casual abundance." The sergeant walked away whistling, and Margaret stood frozen, tray in hand, understanding for the first time the true scale of America's power. It wasn't in their bombs or tanks. It was in their ability to produce chocolate faster than they could consume it. An empire so rich it worried about candy expiring. That night she wrote, "We lost the war the moment we believed our propaganda. They told us America was weak, decadent, fractured. Instead, we found a nation that mass-produces compassion, industrializes mercy, and defeats its enemies not with cruelty, but with proof. Proof that abundance is possible, that dignity costs nothing, that even in captivity one can taste freedom. It tastes like chocolate, and it is the bitterest, sweetest truth I've ever known." May 8th, 1945. The announcement came through the camp loudspeakers just after breakfast. Germany had surrendered unconditionally. The war in Europe was over. In the women's barracks at Camp Reynolds, the news landed like a bomb in reverse, not destroying, but revealing what lay beneath the rubble. Some women wept openly. Others sat in stunned silence. Margaret Hoffman stood at the window, watching snow melt drip from the barracks' eaves, and felt nothing at all. Numbness had become its own kind of protection. The camp commander, Colonel Morrison, called an assembly in the main hall. 800 prisoners gathered, the room thick with uncertainty. Through the interpreter, Morrison spoke clearly. "The war is over. Germany has surrendered. You are no longer enemy combatants. You are displaced persons under the protection of the United States Army. Repatriation will begin within 3 months. You will be returned to your homes or to refugee processing centers in Europe, depending on the conditions in your home regions." Home. The word hung in the air like a question no one wanted to answer. After the assembly, the American staff did something unexpected. They organized a celebration. Not a victory party, that would have been cruel, but an acknowledgement, a ritual of transition. The mess hall was decorated with paper streamers. The cooks prepared a special dinner: roast chicken, mashed potatoes with gravy, corn on the cob, fresh rolls, and for dessert, apple pie with vanilla ice cream, and on every tray, not 1 but 3 Hershey's chocolate bars. Margaret sat with Greta Schaefer and 5 other women who'd become her makeshift family. They ate slowly, tasting each bite, knowing these meals would soon be memories. The conversation was sparse, fragmented. "My brother might be dead," Greta said quietly. "Last letter was from Stalingrad, 1943. My city is rubble," another woman added. "They showed us photographs. Nothing is left." Margareta unwrapped one of her chocolate bars and broke it into squares, passing them around the table like communion wafers. Each woman took a piece, holding it for a moment before eating. "Do you think," Margaret asked slowly, "that this chocolate exists in Germany now? Real chocolate, I mean. Not ersatz. No one answered. They all knew the truth. That night, the American guards did something remarkable. They opened the camp canteen and allowed the women to take as many supplies as they could carry. No charge, no restrictions, just take what you need for the journey home. The women moved through the small store like ghosts in a dream. They filled bags with soap, toothbrushes, sewing kits, writing paper, and every single chocolate bar on the shelves. Some women took 50 bars, wrapping them carefully in newspaper, treating them like gold. Margaret took 20. She knew they wouldn't last the journey. The heat would melt them, or they'd be confiscated, or stolen. But she took them anyway, because they'd become more than food. They were proof that she'd been here, that this had been real, that the enemy had fed her chocolate while her homeland crumbled. Private Jensen found her packing her small suitcase in the barracks. He held something wrapped in brown paper. "Ma'am," he said through the interpreter, "I wanted to give you this before you left." Inside was a full box of Hershey bars, military ration packs, sealed in wax paper, 24 bars. "My mum sends these in care packages," he explained, "but I figure you need them more, for your family, when you get back." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. She tried to refuse. Protocol said prisoners couldn't accept gifts from guards, but Jensen pressed the box into her hands. "Look," he said quietly, "I don't know what you're going back to, but wherever it is, chocolate helps. Trust me. When my dad died, folks brought us chocolate cake. Didn't fix anything, but—" He shrugged. "Sometimes sweetness is all we got against the bitter." She couldn't speak. She just nodded, clutching the box to her chest. 3 weeks later, Margaret and 300 other women boarded a transport ship in New York Harbor. The Statue of Liberty rose green against a June sky. Some women waved at it ironically. Others couldn't look. The journey across the Atlantic took 12 days. Conditions were better than the trip over. Real bunks, adequate food, even medical staff. But the air of dread thickened with every nautical mile. They were sailing toward the ruins of everything they'd known. Margaret kept the chocolate in her suitcase, checking it obsessively. The bars had begun to soften in the ship's hold, but they remained intact. She'd wrapped each one in paper and prayers. The ship docked in Bremerhaven on June 18th, 1945. What had once been a bustling port city was now a landscape of broken concrete and twisted metal. Buildings stood like hollow teeth against the sky. The smell of death and ash still hung in the summer air. Red Cross workers processed them through makeshift stations. Displaced persons, refugees, former soldiers, and prisoners. Thousands of people trying to find their way back to addresses that might not exist anymore. Margaret took a train toward Stuttgart. It traveled slowly through devastation, stopping frequently to clear tracks or wait for repairs. Through the windows, she saw Germany's corpse, flattened cities, burned forests, refugees pushing handcarts piled with everything they owned. When she finally reached Stuttgart, she didn't recognize it. The train station was rubble. Her childhood neighborhood was gone, literally erased, as if a god had reached down and scraped it from the earth. She walked through streets that had no names anymore, past people who looked like walking skeletons, until she found the shelter address her sister had listed in her last letter. It was a church basement, packed with families living in corners separated by hanging blankets. The smell of unwashed bodies and despair was overwhelming. Margaret asked 3 different people before someone recognized the name, Helga Hoffman. Her sister sat on a thin mattress in the corner, gaunt and grey-haired, though she was only 35. When she saw Margaret, she didn't smile or cry. She just stared, as if unsure whether she was seeing a ghost or a living person. "Greta," she whispered, "you're alive." Margaret sat down beside her, and only then did the tears come. They held each other in silence, while around them the church basement continued its quiet existence. After a long time, Margaret opened her suitcase. She pulled out the chocolate bars, still wrapped, still intact despite the journey, and placed them in Helga's lap. Her sister stared at them, uncomprehending. What is this?" "Chocolate, American chocolate, from the camp where I was held." Helga picked one up, turning it over in her trembling hands. "They gave you chocolate? The Americans?" "Every day. 3 times a day sometimes. It's what they feed their soldiers." Helga's face crumpled. She clutched the chocolate bar like it was a child, rocking slightly. "We've been starving, trading jewelry for potatoes, burning furniture, and you were eating chocolate." Margaret nodded, unable to speak. "Then we lost more than the war," Helga whispered. "We lost the future." Over the following weeks, Margaret distributed the chocolate throughout the shelter. She broke each bar into squares and shared them with families who had forgotten what sugar tasted like. Children who'd never had candy wept at the first bite. Old men closed their eyes and remembered better times. But more importantly, she began to tell the story. In the church basement, in the refugee processing centers, in the makeshift schools and hospitals springing up across the ruins, Margaret spoke about Camp Reynolds. She described the abundance, the system, the way America had treated its prisoners not as animals, but as human beings with dignity. Many didn't believe her. "Propaganda," they said, "American propaganda." But she had proof. The chocolate wrappers, still pristine, stamped with Hershey's, mass-produced compassion, industrial-scale mercy. "Listen to me," she would say, showing the wrappers like evidence in a trial. "We were taught they were monsters. We were told they would torture us. Instead, they fed us chocolate. Not once. Not as a special reward, but every single day, as if we were worth the same as their own soldiers. That's the nation we fought. That's the empire we challenged. We never had a chance." By 1947, Margaret had found work with the American occupation forces, translating and helping coordinate relief efforts. She witnessed firsthand the Marshall Plan's implementation, American aid pouring into Germany, rebuilding the nation that had tried to destroy the world. She worked in a distribution center where American food supplies were given to German civilians. One day, a shipment arrived, 500 cases of Hershey's chocolate bars, donated by American churches for German children. Margaret stood in the warehouse, surrounded by crates of chocolate, and laughed until she cried. The program coordinator, a kind woman from Ohio named Dorothy, found her there. "Are you all right?" Margaret gestured at the crates. "I was a prisoner. We refused to eat American chocolate because we thought it was poisoned or drugged. We'd been taught you were evil, that you would destroy us. And now," she looked around, "now you're sending chocolate to our children." Dorothy smiled sadly. "Honey, we learned something our grandparents knew. You can't build peace on empty stomachs, and you can't teach democracy to people who are starving. So you feed us chocolate." "We feed you chocolate," Dorothy agreed, "and hope that sweetness plants better seeds than bitterness did." In 1962, Margaret received a letter from Pennsylvania. It was from Private Jensen, now a middle-aged factory worker with 3 children. He'd tracked her down through the Red Cross. "Dear Mrs. Hoffman," it began, "I don't know if you remember me. I was one of the guards at Camp Reynolds. I've thought about you often over the years, wondered if you made it home safe, if you found your family. I wanted you to know. My daughter's doing a school project on the POW camps. When I told her about the German women we guarded, about how scared you all were, she asked me why we gave you chocolate. I told her, because we could, because we had so much, and you had nothing, because sometimes the most powerful weapon is a candy bar that says, 'You're worth feeding. I hope you're well. I hope Germany is healing, and I hope you remember that not all of us were soldiers. Some of us were just trying to be decent.'" Robert Jensen. Margaret wrote back immediately. They corresponded for years, exchanging letters about families, memories, and the strange paths that war creates. In 1989, when the Berlin Wall fell, Margaret, now elderly and frail, watched on television as East and West Germans shared chocolate and champagne at the Brandenburg Gate. She pulled out her old diary, the one from Camp Reynolds, and read her entries from 1944. On the last page, pressed flat and still faintly fragrant with cocoa, was the wrapper from her first Hershey bar. She ran her fingers over it gently, remembering that moment, the fear, the suspicion, the taste that changed everything. Below it, in her younger handwriting, were the words, "Proof that the future tastes sweeter than propaganda." Margaret passed away in 1995, at the age of 83. Her obituary in the Stuttgart newspaper made no mention of her wartime service or capture, but at her funeral, her daughter placed a single item in her casket alongside her wedding ring, a Hershey's chocolate bar, still wrapped, bought from a local store that now sold American products alongside German ones. At the reception afterward, her daughter told the story, the real story, of how her mother had been a POW, how she'd refused American chocolate out of fear, and how that first bite had broken something inside her that needed to break. She always said, her daughter explained to the gathered family, that Germany lost the war on battlefields, but she lost her faith in the Reich in a Pennsylvania mess hall, the day she tasted chocolate and realized she'd been lied to about everything. The chocolate wasn't drugged, it was just chocolate, abundant, ordinary, given freely. And that truth, that simple, sweet truth, was more powerful than any bomb. Today, the site of Camp Reynolds is a Pennsylvania state park. A small historical marker near the old administration building reads, Camp Reynolds, 1943-1946. POW facility housing 800 Axis prisoners, notable for adherence to Geneva Convention standards and successful repatriation of prisoners without incident. A reminder that even in war, humanity can prevail. Tourists walk past it without stopping, heading toward the hiking trails and picnic areas. But if they looked carefully at the ground near the marker, they might notice something odd. Chocolate bar wrappers, placed there by veterans and historians who know the story, left as small offerings to a moment when sweetness defeated bitterness. Because sometimes the greatest victories aren't won by armies. They're won by mess sergeants who serve chocolate to frightened women and prove, one bite at a time, that propaganda crumbles faster than democracy when you feed people like they matter. And in the end, that's what the chocolate meant. You matter. Even here. Even now. Even though we were enemies, you deserve to be fed. You deserve dignity. You deserve to know that the world can still be sweet. The war ended with signatures and treaties. But for Margaret Hoffman and the women of Camp Reynolds, it ended with chocolate, the taste of truth wrapped in silver foil, dissolving on the tongue like promises kept.